Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to Shape the System. Actually, today a new format that we're going to be trying with Shape the System. As you all know, for our long-time listeners especially, we have a kind of a monthly show, sometimes twice a month, where we interview founders and we kind of go on their journey, especially unpacking the problem that they're solving and the like. And for those of you who've been following in more recent months, KPMG High Growth Ventures came on as a supporter of the show, which we were super excited about and held out for quite a while because we wanted to find someone who had a good fit. And they've been doing some really interesting work with founders and investors more broadly than just Shape the System, obviously. And one of the shows that people that they're working with really stuck out to me was Marc Champagne from Behind the Human is his core show, but also he's working with KPMG High Growth Ventures to do another mini-series called Invested, which I'm super interested in. And I thought, let's take this opportunity to have a slightly different format for our Shape the System show. And so I want to welcome Marc onto the show today. Hi, Marc.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so before we just dive in, I've got some questions about what it is that you talk about on your show. But before we go into that, can you just give us a bit of a sense of what's actually happening in this new mini-series that you're doing with KPMG High Growth Ventures?
Absolutely. So some perspective, my core show, as you mentioned, is Behind the Human, and everything on that show is linked to interviewing or unpacking the minds of great thinkers and inspirational people to understand the mental fitness that allow them to thrive personally and professionally. When I linked up with KPMG and High Growth Ventures, we started to talk about, how are early stage founders doing that, or how are they maybe not doing that? And what does that mean in relation to the early investors that they're working on or working with, I should say. So we made the decision to let's chat with the early stage investors to understand what they're looking for from a mentally fit founder and how that links to the financial fitness of a company or early stage startup as well. And how do we provide some actionable insights in terms of taking control of our minds as well as our finances and making sure that essentially it's a win-win for everyone, right? Because what I've realized on my main show is that as soon as a mind stops working, so does the business, the idea, and everything else, right? So we've got to do everything we can to support the minds of really everyone out there. Yeah. And that's what the show is all about, or this limited series.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I think the angle there that's slightly different. I think there's definitely a lot of dialogue in just founder conversations, and our show and your show generally are a good testament to that. But this idea that there's stakeholders that related to founder stress, and the founder is obviously one of those stakeholders, and I've got a few questions around that, which we'll jump into in a minute. But the downstream or the upstream, depending which way you look at it, is also that the investor is massively impacted by this and probably either a cause of it or able to assist with it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Totally. You nailed it. And that's why we wanted to talk to investors, because there's almost this, they're like a mystical creature out there in a way, right? It's like people are trying to understand, what is it that investors are looking for? Usually from a business and metrics and financial perspective, which we cover as well, because we're recording this in times where the market is really unstable and uncertain, and there's a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty. So we wanted to understand how that's impacting how investors are looking at their portfolio companies and new companies coming on. But also, no one's talking about how do you value mental fitness or the mental well-being of your founders, and where do you place that in kind of a level of importance when it comes to your current companies, and what are you doing to help those founders thrive, as well as people coming in, and then again drawing the links to they don't have to be this mutually exclusive thing where financial success is not linked to mental success. In fact, they have to be linked, but no one seems to be talking about that.
Right. No, it's a massively interesting topic of conversation. The one thing that I was and playing back, I guess, my personal experience in this as well, if I think about my most stressful times as a founder, some of them absolutely were manifested or bound up in the act of being a founder, right? The battle, the struggle, whatever that is. And, for anyone who's been a founder And we're going to talk about this in a second.
Been there.
The thing I wanted to understand, wanted to sort of play back is if I sort of recount the things that were high peak stress moments, a lot of them were not just the problem I was dealing with, but the manner in which I had to deal with stakeholders like investors and other people, boards and the like, and how that actually made the problem more challenging at a mental level to deal with. Is that part of what this is also playing back, is to investors that you actively can influence positively or negatively the stress of the founders that you're working with when they're going through this challenge as being a founder and trying to build something?
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, naturally in conversation, what's coming up is just what questions are we not asking founders that we should be in these times. And usually what the answers that I'm hearing back from investors is really around checking in with their founders. And on the soft side of things, the soft skills of like, how are you feeling?
Right.
You know, have we talked about everything that you want to talk about? And just providing, like the theme has been providing the openings and the opportunities to have open conversations, with also acknowledging the fact that there is, even if the relationship is really healthy in there still is a financial aspect to the conversation. And what I've been really happy to hear from investors, they're acknowledging this, but they're also acknowledging that, you know, we still have to create that safe space, start the conversation, even though we may not be the ones that are going to provide the support, but at least open the door to then say, okay, you know, we acknowledge that these things are important, that your mental fitness is important. Here are some people that you could work with and whatnot. And then there's other insights that have come up as well on who you can turn to in those moments.
And I'm definitely not wanting to take away from the show, so don't give me the data point, but I imagine there is some amazing data around the types of investors that lean into this stuff and how much better them or their portfolios or their founders are doing. Is that data evident? Or
that's definitely more of a long-term data point that we definitely want to capture as time goes on. I mean, that's definitely the hypothesis. And it, from, I guess, a qualitative standpoint, it seems to be proven from conversations.
Anecdotal,
for what sure. I'd love to do, and I know High Growth Ventures would love this as well, is actually collect the data and show over time, maybe that's multiple series, multiple research projects, but to show over time that, okay, those are correlated. And whatever we're tracking from a mental well-being standpoint, if that's going up, so are the returns and the profitability or whatever the metrics are.
Yeah, fascinating. And just like in terms of what you're observing coming from the other side of the lens, like when you think about founder stress, like what is it that typically are the causes of it? Like, I mean, I can think from my own personal perspective, but on a broader data size, like what causes founder stress?
There's general stressors that are always there, as you mentioned, and as we've both experienced as founders. But what we're really trying to focus on, is there anything that's different or standing out based on how uncertain the market is right now? Like, we're really trying to make this as practical for the current times as possible. And of course, I mean, I think this is one that probably comes up all the time, but access to funding, surprise. I mean, they're the ones like the investors are acknowledging this. So access to funding, that market uncertainty, which links to, you know, mental state being a high stressor, and then just business finances in general. You know, there's been a big shift from a focus around growth at all costs and portfolios or funds funding that growth to what's your profitability road look like, and what's, you know, how can we shorten that road and show some clear metrics? So those are the things that are coming up over, or the big themes. But what's interesting on the flip side, when it comes to like what makes a mentally fit founder, the three big areas that are being identified that link well to this is the ability to think clearly, the ability to stay focused, and the ability to make intentional decisions, which, as someone that works around mental fitness and as the core of my main show, those are all things that are controllable on our side versus worrying about the uncontrollables of the market. So it gives me at least some hope that as long as we can get the message out there and find what works personally and individually for each person, and slowly make the adjustments and changes to make sure that we're prioritizing our well-being, then by default, you start to think clearly, you start to make more intentional decisions. And when you're doing all of those things, then all of a sudden access to funding becomes more obvious because you know which funds to approach, or you know you have a very clear message. Like everything becomes a lot smoother.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because I think you're in a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle, depending on where you are in the cycle, I guess.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of a dialogue, just as a slight segue. I had a staff member 20 years ago, and in fact, she's a staff member in my current business, so still a staff member, which is good. She said, I'm super stressed about this thing. And I said, you need to make sure you understand that stress is your response to the thing, not the thing itself. And I think as a founder, that's really challenging to deal with. In terms of like getting back to those three major points, is part of this about also understanding, and potentially from the investor's perspective, but it obviously relates back to the founders and even the early stage team, right? It's not just the founders usually under the stress. The kinds of coping mechanisms or the kind of ways in which founders specifically can deal with this stuff either themselves or in conjunction with their investors or others?
A lot of what came up on that topic was linked to ensuring that you have some sort of trusted and respected personal or business network that you can lean on.
Right.
And when it came to investors specifically, often what I heard was to lean on your very earliest investors, because those are the people that bought in and believe in you from the very beginning. They're also the people that probably aren't going to save the day in terms of a check size right now.
Right.
Whereas, other options you may be looking at would be the financial save. So there's that link is broken in a sense, in a good way, because then you can lean on them for that emotional support. So that came up a few times. And then the other thing was just having these forums and linking up with other founders or linking up with other mentors within your community to just talk openly, like what's working, what's not working, how are you feeling, how are you managing this type of stress and so forth. And, just realizing, because often, as you know, as a founder, it feels like you're isolated from everything else. Like you're the only person in this world working on this one thing.
And
right?
Stressed in this way.
Yeah, exactly. Which is obviously not the case, but there's so much to do. There's so many decisions to make. Things are moving so fast. So if you can just pause and slow down and just come out of the autopilot for a second, come off of the autopilot of, okay, I need to do this, this, and this to get to the next round. And these are the steps for, just pause for a second and almost have a forum with your colleagues to ask some questions and reflect and think, then they're noticing that that's helping quite a bit. And then the third thing that comes up often is founders and their teams, and just being, now more than ever, just being really open and transparent. This comes into something, or ties into something we had talked about in a previous conversation, or that you had mentioned, but just the idea of remote work and so forth, and how it's, when we're not together, it's a bit harder. So they're seeing that the companies that are bringing their teams together more than just like a yearly kind of team building activity, but bringing people together and just, hey, here's what we're working on. Here are the stresses that we're dealing with. There's just a sense of like a release of the pressure across the board, because we all know, okay, well, this is our reality. This is the plan. Are you with us? Are you not? Let's do this together.
Yeah, I think my guess is that there's a bunch of learnings outside of kind of venture and startup and just early stage companies generally that are equally applicable, because we're still talking about the human condition. It's not like these things are unique to being startups. It's just manifesting differently or showing up differently.
Yeah, for sure. It's just human elements, right?
I want to come back to the remote work thing as well. We're kind of all there now. Like, people want to get back into offices. Some people never want to go back to offices, and we can leave that debate for wherever that debate needs to happen. But I'm curious about, in your observation with companies that have been forced to go remote and are now probably some form of hybrid model, or trying to lean into fully remote, or maybe trying to get back to the office, how those stresses, both at the founder level but in the early stage, just in the company generally, are showing up? Are they showing up differently, or what's happening there?
I don't know if they're showing up differently. I think in general, at least the observation I've made from these interviews as well as others, is that there's an adjustment period. Like, not everyone is cut out for remote work, or they're doing their best to adjust. They may not have the ideal home setup to do that, and I think there's still this adjustment period that's taking place. I think we just need to be conscious of that and just be kind, I think, and be open to helping navigate people through that whole journey. From this series specifically, a lot of the things that were coming up around this topic was just the companies that, again, coming back to those human elements right away, that companies that would start off their team kickoff meetings with, how is everyone doing? Like, what's on your mind? Not just like the surface level, hey, how's it going? Yeah, exactly. But really like showing that we're really trying to prioritize how you're feeling right now. Because if the culture is not healthy and the culture is in a state where people aren't motivated, they're fearful or whatever it is, then it doesn't matter what the strategy is or what the plan is. It's going nowhere, right? So there were a few investors that provided examples of some of their portfolio companies where they've really noticed a shift in just better decisions, like right back to those characteristics that they identified, like the ability to think clearer, better decisions, and that they were staying more focused, were the ones that were focusing on understanding the morale and vibe of the culture and making sure they had that right, and then being very open and transparent and so forth. And then all of a sudden you feel like you're more so part of things. And even though you may be in a distance, not sitting next to someone, you're still connecting on that emotional level.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I've probably got one last little question, and it relates sort of back to the show, just so people who are listening to this know what to expect. It's really a question of like, not who's the show for, but if the audience is obviously at the intersection of founders and early stage teams, investors in those, or potential investors in those types of companies, what's in the show for those types of people, or whoever else might be, really the person who will take a lot away from the show?
Yeah, well, I would say definitely I was going into this trying to keep it quite specific to early stage founders and investors, but I mean, I was getting plenty out of it, and I wouldn't consider myself in that camp anymore. Sure. Because again, just some of the things we surface is just being a human being and understanding, well, how do we relieve some of the stressors of just operating in life in general in our current circumstances? So I would say people will leave with impactful, reflective questions that will give the luxury of a pause to shift perspective and think a bit differently. And ask those questions in relation to whatever business you may be a part of or whatever you're working on, and then find your own sense of clarity. While also, there's definitely a very strong through line around just figuring out how you can set up practices, routines, rituals, whatever you can do to just prioritize your health and well-being, whether that's physical exercise or mental fitness, whatever works for you, but just asking the questions and understanding, okay, well, this is where I can start. Maybe it's just really focusing on my sleep and the quality of my sleep and so forth. But we're all different, right? So conversations are loaded full with the prompts and practices to tailor a routine that should work for you.
Amazing. I'm excited to hear some of them. I think the first episode's dropping in like a week from whenever, probably about the time this comes out, actually. So today, probably. Marc Champagne, a toast to your new podcast, our new show, limited show. I had to get one champagne joke in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's super exciting. And I'm hopeful that people who are listening to the Shape the System podcast get something out of it and really enjoy it. And I think anyone's mental well-being is obviously a priority. And hopefully this shifts the dial as well. So thank you for coming on and sharing that with us. And look forward to talking more soon as well.
Right back at you. I appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.